One of my favorite constructions, the segment bisector or perpendicular bisector. We usually call it perpendicular bisector. All right, this is a 2-for-1. We end up with two things when we do this construction. We end up with a segment that's bisected, and we also end up with perpendicular lines. For this construction, you're given a segment to bisect. Right? I'm going to label the points A and B so I have something to talk about. Right? So we'll call that point A and that point B. Right? So you're going to take your compass, put it on either point. Since my compass is opened towards A, I'm going to put it on point B. You need to make sure your compass is opened more than halfway. If you don't open it enough, then what's going to happen is your arcs aren't going to reach one another. Okay? So you want to make sure it's open more than halfway. There are two ways to do this construction. Actually, it's one way, but it's just a little slight difference. Right? One is shown on this page with the little arcs above and below. The other thing you could do is you could go all the way through. I'm going to do this construction both ways. It's the same construction, it's just how big do you want the arcs to be. That's really the only difference. Right? So I'll just do so you can see what both of them look like. Right? So here we're going to draw an arc. Right? And I'm going to do just like the one in your notes. I'm going to go above and below. Right? So we draw the arc above. Make sure you make a big enough arc. If you make too small an arc, sometimes they miss one another. That's probably big enough. If I've messed up, I'll just have to redraw the arc. And then below. Right? So notice if I were to keep going, right, those two arcs would connect and we would have a circle. Right? I'll talk about that after we've done this construction. I'm going to move it over. When I move my compass, do not change the spread of the compass in any way. Keep it exactly the same. Just move it over to point A. And in my case, I have to flip the compass around. Otherwise, it's pointing the wrong direction. And I'm going to do the same thing. I almost missed. See what I mean about if you don't draw it big enough? I just barely caught that arc. So you draw the arc above and below again. Oops. And you try not to do that, but you can't possibly do that because you cannot move things on your page like I can. Oh my goodness. Come on. There we go. Yay. Thank you, compass. All right, so now I'm going to draw a point where those two arcs intersect. I'm going to draw a point where those two arcs intersect, and you would take a straight edge, or in my case, a line tool. I made a nice skinny line this time. And connect your 2 points. And you now have a perpendicular bisector. Let's say something about this line. Right? So first of all, let's label this, or I shouldn't say this line. Let's say something about this construction. It's actually 2 segments since I didn't put arrows on. A and B has to be a segment. You cannot bisect a line because a line is infinite. My bisector could be a line, but this is not a line, right? Because this isn't going to go on forever and ever. I have my line stops. Right? So I'm going to label this as M, that point there. And then the points we drew, let's call this point C and this point D. Right? And so what I'm going to say about this line, or excuse me, about this construction, I'm going to say that AM is congruent, segment AM is congruent to segment BM, right? These are the exact same length. The other thing we can say is that, so this is a bisector, it divides the segment in half. We can also say that AM is perpendicular to, well, I could say AM, but I want to say AB. I want to use my original segment's name. AB is perpendicular to segment DC. So those are two things that we can say about this particular construction. Right? And you might wonder, well, why are these things true? Whenever we do the bisector, it automatically gives us perpendicular lines. So by the way, that does mean that these are all right angles. Right? So 90 degrees. And that would be true if we have 4 right angles. So it's a good idea to do the construction with me on this one, or you can do the construction later and then add in the information either by looking at the PowerPoint, or just ask me to put this up again, or tell you what to write, what was on here. I want to show you the other way, and all it is a slight difference in how you draw the arcs, and then we're going to talk about why does that segment CD, why is that bisecting AB? Why would this construction create a bisector? How would that work? So I've written all over, so here, it'd be really kind of hard for me to do it on this second line because of all my writing. And now I've got to do it on the third line, which is way at the bottom of the page. But that's just the way it is. Right, so again, I wanted to label them A and B. So A and B. Right, again, we're going to put the compass on A. It's easier for me to draw the one above than below from here. So I need to make sure, first of all, that my compass is open more than halfway. That's fine. So the only difference is, if I don't want it to be an arc above and below, I could just draw the arc like this, right, and go through. I wouldn't bother to make a full circle, or it gets really busy with construction marks. Right? I would just draw that much of the circle. Make sure you've made it large enough so that the arcs are going to intersect one another, but you don't, and if you don't want it to be above and below, you just want it to be one piece, you can draw it like that. It's the same thing. You keep the compass open exactly the same, so the exact same spread, and you move it to point B. And in my case, I turn the compass around. All right, so now I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to draw an arc, but from point B. And there we go. So either way is fine for this construction. If my segment's not very big though, and I find that it gets kind of crowded with this second way. I kind of like the first way, but whichever way you like is fine. All right, and so we wanted to draw 2 points. This is red, Christmassy. All right, and so D and C, and then we will draw a line segment, or construct a line segment. Right? You're going to use a compass. My point looks like it's off. Oops. If I don't remember to put the line tool away, there we go. I think my point was slightly off. You want to make sure your point is where it intersects. And doesn't my line seem kind of crooked? It's only going to be as perpendicular as my finger goes. Oh, and it just doesn't want to go there. Okay, there we go. All right, so there we have our perpendicular bisector again. And so it's really the same thing. It's just, do you want little arcs or big arcs? That's the only difference. But now let's talk about why this works. Let's talk about why that is bisecting. All right, so I put my compass here on point A, right? And I drew the arc. If I finish it would be a whole circle. And it intersects right there, right? So that point right there is on the circle, right? So this point is on the circle. A is the center of the circle. It's right center. So it'd be a good idea if you did this construction with me so you can write these things and you don't have to do it later. All right, so what is it called if I go from the center to the edge of the circle? That was one of our vocabulary words. That is a radius. Right, so this here is a radius of a circle. That thing is supposed to be an arrow. How about number B? I put the compass here at B, and the arc goes through here. So what is it? If I have a segment that goes from the center to the edge of a circle, well, that's a radius too. And what do we know about these circles, right? We had the compass open exactly the same, right? I didn't change the compass in any way. So if I draw two circles with the exact same compass measurement, that means those circles are congruent. So those are radii of congruent circles. And 2 radii, or actually it doesn't even matter how many radii there are. We have 100 radii. But radii, by the way, is the plural of radius, of congruent circles are also congruent, right? So if the circles are congruent, so are their radiuses, right? Or radii, right? So we have 2 congruent segments, right, from B to the point on the circle and from A to the point on the circle. Right? So because the circles were congruent, by the way, these little pieces that were left over from each of the circles, right? So that little piece there is not a part of circle B, and the same piece on the other side is not a part of circle A. Those are congruent as well, right? I didn't draw those little boxes very well, but we could mark. Actually, I'll mark with a symbol. So if we use a hash mark, anything with the same number of hash marks is congruent. So this little piece here, right, which goes from here to here, that little piece is congruent to that little piece, which goes from here to here, right? So that's because those are, we used congruent circles, and those are radii of those congruent circles. This point right here ends up being right in the middle, smack dab in the middle between A and B. Right? So that's why that's true. All right, and that's the end of my podcast. We're actually going to look at another construction that's so similar to this one in the next podcast. All right, bye for now.